containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece and Africa as the birthplace.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are doing something a little dangerous.
A little.
Okay, maybe a lot dangerous. We are cracking open a seal that, honestly, most mainstream history has been terrified to touch for about 2,000 years. We are walking into the dense, psychedelic, and often completely misunderstood world of Gnosticism.
It is a heavy stack today. We aren't just looking at the heretical texts, though we are definitely doing that. We're talking about the Gospel of Thomas, the massive, confusing Pistis Sophia, and the cryptic books of Jude.
But we aren't just reading them. We are throwing two very different experts into the ring to fight over what these texts actually mean.
It's quite a matchup.
In one corner, we have the modern, cutting-edge scholarship of Dr. M. David Litwa. He's the new academy guy, looking at Gnostic Egypt and trying to strip away the bias of, the last 50 years or so.
Right. Litwa is the voice of reason here, in a way. He wants to look at the texts as they are, without the baggage of later Christian dogma. He's analyzing them from a position of religious studies, looking at rhetoric and history.
But then we have the challenger, a voice from the 19th century who was largely ignored, or maybe even suppressed, during his time, the poet and self-taught Egyptologist, Gerald Massey.
And Massey is a total game changer.
He's the wild card. We're pulling from his massive works like The Natural Genesis and Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World, and his thesis is, well, it's radical. While Litwa is trying to place these texts into the history of early Christianity,
Massey comes in and just flips the entire table over. He says, wait a minute. These aren't just alternative Christianities. This is the original Egyptian astronomical mythology.
That is the central tension we're going to explore. Modern scholarship, like Litwa's, often tries to mainstream these texts to show how they fit into the diversity of the early church. They want to make them respectable.
But the Massey counter-thesis argues that the parts of these texts that seem the weirdest, the magic, the cosmology, the strange names, are actually the smoking gun. They're the proof that the entire Christian story started as an Egyptian drama of the underworld and the stars, and was only later historicized into the Gospels we know.
So here's the hook for you today. What if the things that make Gnosticism seem crazy, the multiple heavens, the passwords, the light power, are actually just a forgotten language of astronomy?
What if the heretics were actually the ones who kept the original blueprint?
To answer that, we have to start with the text that's the gateway drug for most people, the Gospel of Thomas.
Right. Let's start there.
Let's untack Thomas. Because Dr. Litwa has a very specific bone to pick with how this book has been handled, especially since the 1970s.
He does. And to understand his frustration, you have to look at the politics of biblical scholarship. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was this massive push to de-Gnosticize Thomas.
De-Gnosticize it? You mean like clean it up?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Scholars wanted to make it respectable. They wanted to use it to solve the synoptic problem.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. For those listening who aren't biblical scholars, the synoptic problem is basically the puzzle of how Matthew, Mark, and Luke relate to each other, right? They share so much material, scholars think they copied from a common source.
Precisely. They call that hypothetical source Q. And scholars desperately wanted Thomas to be Q. They wanted it to be this early, authentic collection of Jesus sayings, the real Jesus, before the church got hold of him.
So they were trying to find a more primitive, maybe more authentic version of Jesus's words?
Yes. So they basically said, look, these sayings sound just like Jesus in the Bible. Let's ignore the weird stuff about becoming light and, drinking from his mouth. Just focus on the parables.
They wanted a clean Thomas, a Thomas you could take home to meet your parents.
That's a perfect way to put it. But Litwa says that is intellectually dishonest. He firmly categorizes it as Gnostic. He argues you can't just cherry-pick the normal stuff and ignore the cosmic weirdness. The weirdness is the point.
Okay, so how does he explain the mix of normal and weird?
Right. Litwa proposes a fascinating theory. The structure of the Gospel of Thomas is a rhetorical trap, or, more charitably, a strategy of initiation.
A trap. I like that.
He notes that the text mixes synoptic sayings, the familiar ones, with esoteric ones. And it does this in a stack. You get a familiar saying, then a weird one. then a familiar one, then a stranger one.
It's like luring the reader in. You nod along, oh yes, the sower and the seed, I know this one, and then suddenly Jesus says, whoever drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I shall be he.
And you're left thinking, hang on, did I miss a page?
Exact.
Precisely. Litwa argues this is intentional. It's meant to lead the reader from the known Jesus, the Jewish sage, to a new vision. And this new vision is fundamentally different from the canonical view, especially when you contrast it with the Gospel of John.
Litwa makes a big deal about this comparison with John. I found that really helpful. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is the exclusive way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him.
Yes. In John, the divine light is concentrated in one person, Jesus. The world is dark. He is the light. But in Thomas, that exclusivism is exploded.
Exploded how?
The light isn't just in Jesus. It is in everyone. Litwa points out that in Thomas, Jesus acts as a talking head or a mystagogue, an initiator. He's saying, I'm not the only one. You have this light too. Find it.
It's the difference between worshiping the light source and becoming the light source.
That is the Gnostic pivot, 100%. And this leads us to one of the most controversial sayings in Thomas, saying 12.
Ah, yes. The James problem.
The James problem. This is the one where the disciples ask Jesus who will lead them after he's gone, and Jesus tells them to go to James the just, for whom heaven and earth came into being.
Which makes no sense on the surface. James represents the very Jewish, legalistic branch of early Christianity. The guys who strictly followed the law, didn't like Paul, and certainly didn't like the weird Gnostic stuff. Why would a Gnostic Jesus praise James?
Litwa's take here is brilliant. He agrees with scholars like Melissa Harl-Selu that this is actually satire.
Satire? How?
Think about the Gnostic worldview. In Thomas, the world and material creation are bad things. The text calls the world a carcass. It's a prison.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. If Jesus says heaven and earth were made for James, he's not complimenting James. He's saying James belongs to this physical, dead creation. He's the master of the carcass.
It's a backhanded compliment of the highest order. A sick burn, 2nd century style. Yeah, go to James. He's the king of this pile of garbage.
Exactly. He is distancing the Gnostic learner from the Jewish Christian authority. It's a subtle but devastating critique.
Okay, so that's the modern scholarly view. Litwa sees it as a 2nd century rhetorical strategy to redefine Jesus against the Orthodox Church. But now, let's bring in Gerald Massey.
Here's where the floor drops out. Because Massey looks at those same logia or sayings, and he doesn't see a 2nd century reinterpretation. He sees something infinitely older.
He doesn't think it's a reaction to anything.
Not at all. He argues that the logia kyriaka, the sayings of the Lord, weren't spoken by a historic Judean teacher at all.
This is the core of the Massey counterthesis. He claims these sayings come directly from the Egyptian ritual, what most people call the Book of the Dead.
Correct. Massey identifies the Lord, Kyriakos, not as Jesus of Nazareth, but as Horus, or more specifically, the Egyptian god Hetep, and the sayer, the one writing it down.
Is not Matthew the disciple?
No, it is the Egyptian god Tat, also known as Mati.
Mati. Matthew. It's phonetically close, but is that just a coincidence? It sounds like a stretch.
Massey argues it's etymological. Mati means truth or the true. Tat Mati is the scribe of the gods, the one who records the sayings. So the gospel, according to Matthew, is, in his view, a historicized version of the sayings of Mati, the words of truth uttered by Horus in the Egyptian mysteries.
So when Thomas talks about the light within, that concept Litwa was praising as a radical new vision, Massey wouldn't say that's a reaction to the Gospel of John.
Not even close. He would say that's just standard Egyptian astronomy.
Astronomy.
Exactly. Massey connects the light in everyone to the Egyptian doctrine of the Kabsu stars. In the ritual, the deceased soul declares, I am the Kabsu lamps.
Kabsu. Can we define that? What exactly does that refer to in the night sky?
The Kabsu are the stars that never set, the circumpolar stars in the northern sky. To the Egyptians, these stars represented immortality because they never disappear below the horizon into the underworld. They never died.
So they were eternal.
They represent the internal spark of the divine resurrection. It's an astronomical metaphor for the soul's immortality. Massey argues that the Gnostics didn't invent this theology. They were just the ones who remembered that the light wasn't a man, but a cosmic principle residing in the human soul, derived from the stars.
So for Massey, Thomas isn't a new vision. It's the old vision. It's the original Egyptian wisdom before it got turned into a biography of a carpenter.
Precisely, and this is why this deep dive is so interesting. You have Litwa saying, Look at how clever these Gnostics were, subverting the dominant narrative.
And you have Massey saying, they weren't subverting a narrative, they were preserving the original science of the soul.
And that contrast gets even more stark when we move on.
And if you think Thomas is weird, wait until we get to Pistis Sophia, because this is where the divide between Litwa and Massey becomes a chasm, yet they bridge the same reality.
Oh, Pistis Sophia. Faith, wisdom. This is a massive, sprawling text. It's confusing, it's dense, and Litwa seems kind of annoyed that nobody reads it.
He calls it the Cinderella of Gnostic texts, right?
Yes. Yeah. Ignored and left in the ashes while everyone pays attention to the ugly stepsisters of heresy hunting. The reason, Litwa explains, is that scholars have labeled it degenerate.
Degenerate is a harsh word for a holy book. Why the hate?
Well, the academic trend has been to prefer the pure Gnosticism of the Sethians or Valentinians, the high philosophical stuff that reads like Plato on acid.
Right, the more abstract philosophical texts.
Pistis Sophia, on the other hand, is messy. It's late, probably 3rd or 4th century. It's incredibly repetitive, and it's full of syncretism.
Syncretism, that's just blending different religions, right?
Yes. It mixes psalms, odes of Solomon, Egyptian magic, and strange cosmology all into one pot. Usually, scholars hate that. They want clean lines of transmission. But Litwa defends it. He says this syncretism is a strength.
A strength how?
He argues that the authors felt a sovereign right to retell the story. They weren't just copying. They were creating a sophisticated cosmology. They were answering the question, how does the soul get back to the light? And they used every tool they had, Jewish scripture, Egyptian myth, Greek philosophy.
So Litwa sees it as a creative collage, a late-stage Gnostic masterpiece where they threw everything at the wall to see what stuck.
But Massey looks at Pistis Sophia and sees a smoking gun.
For him, it's not a collage, it's the original picture.
He does. For Massey, Pistis Sophia is the key that unlocks the whole myth, because it retains the geography of the myth. Let's start with the setting. The text takes place after the resurrection. Jesus is teaching his disciples for 11 years after he rose from the dead.
11 years? That's a long time.
And where are they? On the Mount of Olives.
Which sounds biblical. The Mount of Olives is right outside Jerusalem. That gives it a veneer of history.
It sounds biblical until you look closer. Massey argues that in Pistis Sophia, the setting is clearly not the geographical Judea. The entire text describes events in Amenta, the Egyptian underworld, the earth of eternity.
So the Mount of Olives isn't a hill near Jerusalem?
No. It is the Egyptian Mount Baku, the Mount of the Olive Tree of Dawn.
The Mount of the Olive Tree of Dawn. Okay, that sounds way more Lord of the Rings than New Testament. What is Mount Baku?
It's pure mythology. In Egyptian myth, the sun rises from Mount Baku. It is the place of the solar birth. It's the eastern horizon of the sky. Massey points out that in Pistis Sophia, Jesus is often called Aber Amentho.
Aber Amentho. Litwa mentions that too, doesn't he?
Litwa notes the name but treats it as just another magic title, part of the abracadabra of the text.
But Massey decodes it.
He decodes it. He says it is the Jewish Gnostic version of Osiris Kentamenta, the Lord of Amenta, the Lord of the underworld.
So, the Jesus in Pistis Sophia isn't a Galilean preacher. He is the Lord of the dead, teaching souls how to navigate the afterlife.
That changes the whole vibe of the book. It's not a history, it's a map.
A map of the afterlife.
Exactly. And this explains the weird cosmology that Litwa mentions. Litwa talks about the eons and the treasuries of light. He admits it's monotonous, this endless listing of spheres and powers.
Yeah, it can be a tough read.
But Massey explains that this is simply astronomical mythology without the historicizing veil. The eons are time cycles, the Gnostic version of Egyptian timekeeping. They're astronomical periods.
And the disciples, in Pistis Sophia, they ask a lot of questions. They seem confused half the time.
And that's the tell. Massey argues that the 12 disciples in this text are clearly not fishermen. They represent the 12 eons, or the astronomical powers of the zodiac.
The zodiac signs.
Yes. They serve the sun god Horus or Jesus in the lower treasure, which is the physical universe. They are the rowers of the solar bark. They move the sun through the sky.
So when they are asking Jesus questions, it's basically the zodiac stars asking the sun for instruction.
In a sense, yes. It is the drama of the cosmos personalized. And then you have the central drama of the book, the fall of Sophia. Litwa describes how Sophia falls into chaos and is tormented by a lion-faced power, and Jesus has to rescue her.
It's a classic damsel in distress story, but on a cosmic scale.
It is. And Massey traces this directly to the Egyptian lunar mythos. He argues that Sophia represents the moon, or a specific constellation falling into the darkness.
The darkness being?
What? The dragon of darkness, or the lion-faced power, is the Egyptian Apap monster, or Sut. It's the force of chaos that tries to swallow light. So the solar light Horus Jesus has to descend into the underworld to rescue the light, the moon Sophia, from the darkness.
So Pistis Sophia isn't a degenerate mishmash. It's a faithful retelling of the solar and lunar cycles, just using Gnostic names.
That is Massey's verdict. He says it appears degenerate or incoherent only if you try to read it as Christian theology or history. If you read it as Egyptian astronomy, the monotonous metaphysics suddenly make perfect mechanical sense. It's a system of timekeeping and soul travel.
This naturally brings us to the books of Ju. These are even more hardcore than Pistis Sophia. Litwa calls them magical.
Yes, the books of Ju are full of diagrams, ciphers, and what Litwa calls passwords. He compares them to the Hecalot literature Jewish mysticism, where you ascend through palaces to see God, and the Greek magical papyri.
Like, say this word to get past this demon, that kind of thing.
Exactly that. Litwa suggests these texts were used in actual rituals, maybe baptisms involving fire or incense. He paints a picture of Gnostics actually performing these rites, trying to memorize the seals so their souls wouldn't get stopped by the archons, the rulers after death.
That sounds incredible. It makes the religion feel very tactile, very practical. But again, Massey has a different spin on the magic.
Of course he does. Massey links the books of Ju to the Egyptian books of the Great Logos. He points out that the name Ju is likely derived from the Egyptian Iu.
What does that mean?
Iu means the coming one. It's a title for the returning solar deity, or Isa, the son of Iu. Massey argues this is the etymological root of the name Jesus. So the books of Ju are the books of Jesus, but the Egyptian Jesus, the solar force.
And the magic passwords. What are those then?
Massey argues that the magic is simply the practical application of the mythos. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the soul has to know the names of the gates and the guardians to pass through.
Right, it's a test.
It's a test of knowledge. If you don't know the name, you don't pass. The books of Ju are just the Gnostic version of this guide. It's not magic in the sense of pulling a rabbit out of a hat. It's gnosis knowledge. The password is the knowledge required for the soul to pass through the gates of the underworld.
So Litwa defends the magic against Protestant scholars who called it degenerate, saying, hey, this is sophisticated ritual.
And Massey goes further and says it's not just ritual. It's the survival of the ancient guide to the afterlife.
Correct. And this leads us to the big question, the elephant in the room. If this connection to Egypt is so obvious to Massey, and frankly, once you see the Mount of Olives as the Mount of Dawn, it's hard to unsee, why do we not know this? Why is this not the standard history?
That's the million-dollar question. And this is where we have to talk about the cover-up. We need to bring in Martin Bernal and his book, Black Athena.
Right. Bernal's work is controversial but essential here.
Bernal provides the crucial context for why Massey was ignored. Bernal argues that there was a systematic fabrication of ancient Greece in the 18th and 19th centuries. European scholars, driven by the rising racism of the time and the Aryan model of history,
The Aryan model.
wanted to disconnect Western civilization from Africa and the Semitic East.
They wanted a pure white Greece. They didn't want their philosophy or their religion coming from Egypt. It didn't fit the narrative.
Exactly. They wanted to believe that Greece was a miracle of spontaneous genius, not a child of Egypt. And Litwa touches on this too, from a different angle. He notes that even today, scholars are uncomfortable calling Thomas Gnostic, or dealing with the magical Pistis Sophia.
Why is that?
He attributes this to theological bias, a Protestant preference for faith over ritual, and a dislike of anything that smells like paganism or magic.
So you have racism on one side, distancing from Egypt, and theological bias on the other, distancing from ritual and magic. And poor Gerald Massey is standing there screaming, but it's all Egyptian!
He is, and Massey doesn't hold back. He has a term for the people who took these allegories literally.
The idiots.
Ouch. The idiots. That feels personal.
It's a term borrowed from the Gnostics themselves. Massey argues that the Gnostics, like the authors of Pistis Sophia, were not heretics inventing new things. They were the preservers.
The preservers of the original knowledge.
They kept the astronomical wisdom. The great inversion happened when the canonical Gospels historicized the myth. Can you give us an example, something specific where we can see this historicizing happen? Because that's a big claim, that the Bible stories are just solidified myths.
Of course. Let's look at the miracle of the fish. Litwa discusses the scene in John where the disciples catch 153 fish. It's presented as a miracle on a boat in Galilee.
Right, a historical event. They were hungry, they caught fish. End of story.
Massey points to the Egyptian ritual. There is a scene where Sebek, the crocodile god, who is often a form of Horus, catches the fish of the inundation in a net. The net represents the underworld. Catching the fish is a symbol of catching souls or capturing the produce of the Nile.
So the miraculous draft of fishes isn't about feeding people dinner.
No. It's about the Savior Sebek, or Jesus gathering souls in the net of the underworld.
That completely changes the meaning.
Or take the resurrection itself. In the Gospels, it is a one-time historical event. A man died and came back.
The central event of Christianity.
In Egypt, the resurrection is the annual return of the sun, Horus, and the periodic rebirth of the soul in Amenta. Massey argues that the idiots took a repeating, eternal truth, a cycle of nature, and froze it into a one-time historical claim. And in doing so, they lost the meaning.
That is a heavy realization. It implies that by trying to make it real in history, they actually made it less true in the cosmic sense.
That is Massey's entire argument. He says the Gnostic texts are the original because they still contain the mythos. Pistis Sophia isn't a corruption of the Gospels. The Gospels are a corruption of the wisdom found in Pistis Sophia.
Let's synthesize this. We have two very different portraits of Jesus emerging from this deep dive.
Radically different.
Yes. From Litwa, we get a Jesus of the deep dive who is a mystagogue, a distinct person of light. He challenges the exclusivism of the Orthodox Church. He is a guide, a teacher, a talking head who wants you to realize you have the light within.
And Litwa sees this as a product of syncretism, Egypt, Judaism, and Greece blending to create something new and sophisticated in the 2nd century.
And Massey, what's his Jesus?
Massey's Jesus is Iyamhitep. He is the Egyptian Prince of Peace. He is a solar deity, not a human. Massey calls him the Kerest,
The Keras.
the Egyptian word for mummy, which he argues is the root of Christ, or Christos.
Wait, Christ comes from mummy. That is an etymology I have never heard in Sunday school.
No. Kerest refers to the embalmed body, the anointed one, prepared for resurrection. The Kerest is the image of the soul that will rise again. So for Massey, Jesus is the model of the soul's journey.
And for him, it's not syncretism. It's not a blend.
He argues for continuity. Egypt is the root. Judaism and Christianity are, in his words, the detritus, the fragments that drifted away from the source and got misunderstood.
So using Massey, we can actually support Litwa's defense of Pistis Sophia. It's a fascinating intersection.
Exactly. Litwa says Pistis Sophia isn't degenerate. Massey provides the why. It isn't degenerate because it is actually the most complete survival of the original astronomical system. The canonical Gospels are the stripped-down, misunderstood versions.
The weirdness of Pistis Sophia, the eons, the magic, the zodiac disciples, is actually the original code.
That's the argument.
That turns the whole heresy narrative upside down. The heretics were the ones who remembered the code. The Orthodox were the ones who lost the key.
That is the compelling possibility. When you read Pistis Sophia with Massey's key, the nonsense becomes astronomy. The magic becomes the sign language of the stars.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. It leaves us with a really provocative thought.
It really does.
If Massey is right, and texts like Pistis Sophia are the blueprint rather than the heresy, does that mean the weirdness of Gnosticism is actually just the forgotten language of the stars?
It forces you to look at the Bible stories differently. Next time you hear about the Mount of Olives or the 12 disciples or the virgin birth, ask yourself, did this happen on Earth?
Or is it a map of the stars? Is it a story about the soul's journey through the underworld, played out in the constellations above our heads?
Maybe the original scripture wasn't written on paper. Maybe it was written in the sky.
And we have just forgotten how to read it.
It's a powerful thought.
Listeners, next time you are outside at night, look up. You might be reading the original gospel. Thanks for diving deep with us. Keep looking up and keep asking questions. We'll see you next time.
Containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece and Africa as the birthplace.